It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. Live from Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate.
Okay. This is going to be 19 minutes. So welcome to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left, James Flippin on your right. This is a week of hellos and goodbyes. Joe Biden said his goodbye last week. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But coming up on Monday, it's going to be the inauguration of Donald Trump. And unfortunately, it's so cold, they're going to have to move it inside. It is freezing out there. I will say that.
Yeah, no, this is definitely like dangerous cold. Like I heard one meteorologist talking about the type where any skin that's exposed, it's like at risk of frostbite with an extended period of time spent outdoors. So, I mean, there's a lot of jokes going around, like, oh, the soft MAGA, and Trump's a softie, and all this kind of stuff. But I think it makes sense.
Some of it is around, some of the jokes are around that JFK did his in 61 at 7-degree wind chill with no coat on. Remember that iconic thing of him not even wearing a coat?
Right.
And Obama's was cold also. But here's my experience around this. I actually have a personal experience of this. In 1985, Ronald Reagan's second inaugural, it was my first day, maybe my first week, where I was interning for my predecessor, Chuck Schumer. I'd just come from Plattsburgh State, one of the coldest places on the whole map. And I get down there, I am freezing my tuchus off, but they say, you want a ticket to the inaugural. And I'm like, this is amazing. I mean, I was a Reagan guy, but I was like so amped. And then they moved that one inside also. But what I found interesting, they moved it inside the rotunda. You can't fit like 400 people in the rotunda. It's not that big. Have you heard yet? Are they going to let people watch it from somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're going to have the video feed set up. I don't know if they're going to have that same ability to watch it from outside.
I thought they did it in the Cap Center. It doesn't exist anymore. Now there's a hockey or basketball arena downtown. Maybe they'll do it there.
Capital One Arena. They are doing some sort of. I think they're having like the procession or the parade kind of moving through there at Capital One Arena. Yes.
Okay, because you can't have the parade and not have crowds gather. Like when you come down Pennsylvania Avenue, that's kind of iconic too. You walk and and everything else. But let's go. That's Ronald Reagan to 1985.
And then before that, it was like Taft. Those are the only two times they've ever done this.
Well, didn't we have one president who caught pneumonia on his inaugural day? Harrison, maybe?
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. We did a special for the network where we talked about Inauguration Day, and we asked the historian, what's the deal with that? Because there's some notion that maybe that's kind of apocryphal about William Henry Harrison. Because what happened was, back in the day of it being like all patronage jobs, like in terms of like whoever got the civil service, it was like, who do you know? And, how much can you kind of glad hand your way to get those jobs? Harrison was holding meetings for all hours of the day, welcoming all comers who wanted these jobs.
Right.
The suggestion is maybe that was actually what kind of wore him down and led to his demise because he was sickly leading into that. Yeah, but he gave a long speech out in really cold weather. And the famous story was he caught pneumonia as a result of all that.
Yeah, got it. Well, that's the. I hope no one catches pneumonia this time. By the time we're on the air next, we will have a new president of the United States. Convicted felon Donald Trump. But let's.
I'm so happy that you sort of snuck that in because I would be remiss. I've been catching a lot of flack on social media. I just want to make a quick statement.
Go ahead.
That your ongoing statements about Trump claiming that he was going to inject bleach or something that people should inject is erroneous. That's not what he said. He was referring to experimental treatments that involved the use of light and potentially diluted bleach and the way that can, which has been used like to rectify drinking water in some parts of South America, for example, a diluted amount of bleach.
The video is available. Anyone can go look at it.
He was talking about it in a sort of off the cuff. There's experimental treatments. I just want to note that. That's all.
Okay, here's people have raised this before. And they said, well, he didn't suggest it. Right, he didn't. He had Dr. Blix, or whatever her name is, was sitting there, and he turns and does the thing that he didn't. Let's remember what Donald Trump was doing there at the period. Not sticking to the message about what we needed to do to get better and how we're going to recover as a country. And he says, what about, I've heard about these other, he does the things people say. He did one of those. People say, what about the idea of bleach and light to blast the system? And you can see this woman, Blix, is that what her name is?
I think it was Burks.
Burks, exactly. Burks, kind of like rolling her eyes. The idea is not whether he said go do it. It's whether it was a stupid thing to say and it was. But I appreciate you
I disagree, but that's okay.
I appreciate you clarifying that. But let's go. Before we move on to all things Trump for 4 years, my hair hurts just saying that. Let's talk about Joe Biden, who you and I commented in passing. He's kind of had a very tepid exit. He did a couple of interviews and also gave a speech from the Oval Office. Rather than go into your Biden derangement syndrome, let me talk about the 3 themes he said, because they sound like they might be things that James Flippin might say. One, he said, we've got to be careful about the concentration of wealth, that the middle class and those struggling to make it have a smaller portion than ever the oligarchs control the thing. Second, he says, don't let corporate guys run our country. And a third thing that says protect our democracy. Make sure that our democracy, that no president is above the law and everything. Those are 3, you might think they're jabs at Trump, and there certainly are contrasts. Those are 3 pretty reasonable things to say on your way out the door that you're concerned about, no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that any president kind of worth his salt is going to take some shots on the way out the door and say, oh, this is what I want you to keep in mind in terms of the juxtaposition from my administration to the incoming administration. But there were some things within Biden's comments that really struck me as rather rich, kind of beyond the pale, if you will, because when he talks about the tech-based oligarchy that he's concerned about, and I think he used the cutesy term tech industrial complex, which I like, you do have to have some level of concern anytime the world's richest person is that cozied up to
people. I mean, more than one tech guy is now, cozying up
to
this.
Vivek Ramaswamy, and of course, we've seen guys like Jeff Bezos
and Zuckerberg. We talked about Zuckerberg last
kind
week.
Of coming back into the fray. So yeah, that's all legitimate, and I think that you should be a little bit concerned about the implication of that. But what's really rich is that you did not hear Biden, of course, refer to a guy like George Soros, who he just gave the Presidential Medal of Freedom to, a guy who for many years has been using his outsized financial influence to make an impact in the world of politics in terms of funding different campaigns and putting money into groups that support, really far-left prosecutors in certain DA races and stuff like that. So a guy like George Soros, I guess it's just fine for him to be investing his money into politics, but he doesn't like a guy like Elon Musk. That's hypocritical.
I think so, and I don't know what the rules are around here about making disclosures. My ex-wife is engaged to George Soros' son, so I'll just say that, and you can use that for whatever you want. I guess the difference is he wasn't saying rich people giving to campaigns or trying to get their vote to count more than another person's is the problem. It's these social media companies, these tech companies that control AI, which could be a threat, control social media, which is infecting our kids. These people have outside, they're not only rich, not only is that concentrated wealth, like $1 billion is like doesn't even get you to the table of these guys anymore, but they have so much influence over our world that giving them too much unfettered power is problematic. And remember, to say what you want about Biden, one of the things that made the tech world turn around on Trump is that Biden was cracking down on these tech guys a lot and saying you antitrust and putting regulations on things they can say and do to infect our kids. So it's a little bit different. I don't think he was saying money in politics is the problem. He was saying mega money through social media and technology is the problem.
Yeah, and I do think that you're already seeing some of that in terms of the lead up to the inauguration and some of the way there's been some fractious kind of debate about somebody like a Vivek Ramaswamy and the comments that he made concerning like the H-1B visa and all that kind of stuff. There is some concern, I think, even for people on the right as to what are the motivations behind an Elon Musk, behind a Vivek Ramaswamy, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos? Are they just kind of trying to continue to make money?
That was my point.
Cozying up to the person in power.
Listen, if right and left ever get together on stuff in the future, and we're very far apart right now in American civic life, it's about we all don't like these tech guys. We all think they're too powerful. They're bad for our kids. They're bad for our debates. They're bad for our country. These tech guys and the AI is going to get even worse pretty soon. We are a stone's throw away from getting an email from Eric Salas saying we got 2 AI people to come do the debate for you.
It is kind of brutal how every time you open up, like you just go to type out an email now because Google like changed their instructions or something.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to do this in an AI?
Yeah, I mean,
want AI to summarize this? Oh, whoa, just chill. Okay.
And the scariest thing is that AI now can replicate our voices almost perfectly. I mean, the reason for us to come into the studio on Saturday is basically not much anymore.
Right.
But I think that that's right. But listen, that's Biden. He's on the way out the door. We've already kind of forgotten about him. He gave an exit interview to O'Donnell at MSNBC and said some moderately newsworthy things. But he's gone now. Now most of the conversation is about the transition forward.
As it should be. I think the one thing that I'll just note, and it's, in my opinion, not trying to kick somebody on their way out or throw dirt on somebody, anything like that. I just do want to note that it's so obvious that Biden at this point couldn't have completed another term. I mean, just in terms of his mental acuity, his physical fitness, whatever it may be. I'm not a doctor. You could just see that the guy is very diminished.
Now, I make a distinction. Maybe this will be the last time we have this conversation because we've had a lot over the last couple of years. I make a distinction about the things we can hear as opposed to what his mental capacity is. I think I did a podcast in 2022, believe it or not, saying the problem with Biden is he sounds so weak and feeble. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you can do about that. When he gave that one State of the Union address, so he did a lot better, it's because he was yelling, because he thought he had to yell to the whole crowd. I don't know what you do, but I agree with you. In his hesitations, in the timbre of his voice, you almost have to lean forward into your monitor or your TV to say, what is he saying? And even if this guy said the most brilliant thing on earth, you'd still come away saying that was an old guy that said that brilliant thing. But I agree with that. So let's move ahead to our second item. And I am so impressed with myself with the way I titled this item on our rundown. Confirmation bias. I'm so clever.
That's a very writing headlines.
That's a very nerdy headline. And there are a whole bunch since we met last. The new Congress has taken over. Now they're having confirmation hearings. I don't know. There's an enormous amount of news about who might get confirmed. It seems like all of them have pretty good pace to get. But let's start going in order of how the week started. First was Hegseth. Mm-hmm. And Hegseth, if I were to summarize, it was the Democrats saying, what about this bad thing you did in your past? And the Republicans saying, these Democrats, they're all just concerned about your past. We want to, whatever it is. How do you think Hegseth did as someone who's rooting for him, someone who wants Trump to be a success? How do you think he did?
Well, I think that generally speaking, it was kind of a good indication that he is a polished guy who has no problem on the big stage, right? Which you would expect, considering his past experience on Fox and his extensive experience kind of being on microphone, being on camera. It shows that he's not intimidated by that moment or that presence. And I think that goes a long way in these types of hearings. I do think that generally speaking, he answered the questions the way you would expect, that he maintains that he had a campaign, like a smear campaign that was kind of waged against him. That's his perception of it. People on the left might see it differently. Some of his allies on the right kind of agree with him. But yeah, I think the way that the discussion at times was actually useful kind of surprised me. Like, in other words, the exchange between him and Kirsten Gillibrand. I have my own feelings about women in combat. It led to some discussions between me and people.
What is Hegseth's position on women in combat?
Well, I think Hegseth is concerned about using women as infantry, for example, or in active combat.
So he's against
roles.
that.
I believe that's true.
Well, that's the position he changed. That was the position he had in his books, had on TV, and then shows up in Congress and says, oh, never mind. Some of the best war fighters are women.
Well, it's like, so I had a discussion with somebody where I was saying, yeah, that kind of makes sense to me. Like, the physical limitations, or like, the concept of carrying all this gear, rucking from place to place, miles, carrying heavy weaponry. But then I heard somebody noting that there was a lot of women who played key roles in parts of Iraq and Afghanistan in terms of like communication and going into the community and making some of those connections with locals.
And also shooting bullets at people and killing our enemies. They're war fighters also. I mean, here's the problem I have with it, is that, and by the way, I agree with your premise. He looked really good on TV. And that's the problem with the way Donald Trump picks his cabinet. He basically does auditions, not interviews. Like, yes, if you want someone who looks really bright and shiny and you don't care about qualifications, in a way, you know what he is? He's a DEI hire, or in his case, a DUI hire, given his record. You can do it.
That's a cute line.
That's a good line. You want that line? That's for TikTok. I mean, I think that part of the problem is, this is a big organization. He's shown that he was unable to run small organizations. He has things in his background.
You're referring to the Veterans Affairs?
His veterans organizations that fired him.
Okay.
He has a problem within his department with recruitment around getting people to come and apply for jobs, and he's pissing on people on efforts of the Defense Department to recruit more people to come work as our warfighters. And then he does this thing around the allegations against him. It's an anonymous whisper campaign. No, people, live human beings that we know of and were interviewed by the FBI, made these allegations under oath. And have we seen those FBI reports? No. Have members of the Senate seen these FBI reports? Only the chairman and ranking member have seen the reports. They refuse to present them to the other members. So here it is. A lot of information I think is relevant to whether this guy is up for the job. And then it gets down to your point about substance. Hey, pick a lane, pal. If you want to hang in there and tell me, after years and years of writing in your books and saying on Fox News, women should not be in the military, and then changing it and saying, no, women should not be in the infantry or in war-fighting positions, you can't just show up to the United States Senate and say, never mind, I now agree with you, which is essentially what he did when Senator Gillibrand asked those questions.
I do think that the overarching theme behind the way Hegseth looks at all of this was laid out in his opening statement, where he said this should be about merit. This should be about equal standards that apply regardless of whether or not you're the private entering the service or the highest general. You want to have unique and universal standards that apply to the U.S. military that lead to the most efficient fighting force that we could possibly have, and that aims to keep America safe both home and abroad.
And that's what we have. The only things that we've done differently
okay, go ahead.
I was going to say the only things we've done differently in the Biden administration is we have a terrible recruitment problem. These are tough jobs to fill. We don't pay we don't pay people in the military that much.
But you've also heard from top military officials, including I think a guy like Mark Milley, who's talked about the way that DEI, if you want to use that acronym, has factored into the mission statement of the military. This connects back to the debate we had last week about the fires.
Yes.
And whether or not that takes away from some of that merit-based
100%.
discussion.
There were people who made that allegation when the military accepted blacks. There are people that make that allegation when other forces are desegregated and more people are invited to come in and serve. I generally think our country we're the strongest military in the world. It's gotten stronger in part because women have been included, because we don't exclude women from the military. That's one of the reasons that things have gotten stronger. I just don't, there's no empirical evidence to put it. Now, all that people point out when they talk about DEI with this DEI thing is that there has been a lot more aggressive effort, but started under Trump, ironically, a much more aggressive effort to reach out to recruit more types of people with more backgrounds, et cetera, to be. But for years, we had restrictions against gays serving in the military.
Right.
And I don't think that we're a weaker country. I don't think because of whatever someone's sexual orientation is, they carry it into the battlefield. And I feel the same way about women. I don't believe we should lower our standards. I believe there are women who can achieve those standards.
Yeah, I think that the big picture thing for me is that if you have an organization that has standards, merit-based requirements that it takes to get from point A to point B and to succeed, you would expect that to be the result. And if you have, over time, a more diverse, more all-encompassing group of individuals that make that up, great. That's a powerful thing. It shouldn't be the means to the end to get to
I think that's right. I am no expert on this. But what if, for example, sometime in the 1920s, they said everyone should be at least 6 feet, 200 pounds to be a military person.
I think they used to have kind of rules
exactly,
like that.
Something like that, which de facto said to a lot of people, we don't want you, even if you're not going into a job that you need to be a big, bulking guy. Mm-hmm. None of the specialized units of the military have had their standards changed in like 60 years. Mm-hmm. Those have remained the same. That's why it's really tough to be a SEAL if you're a woman. However, to say that we should be more welcoming doesn't make us a weaker country, it makes us a stronger country, in my view. So let's move on. We have to go to a break, but when we come back, there are other people that were standing for confirmation. There was Pam Bondi, there was Kristi Noem, there was, you had all kinds of folks. We don't need to go over each one every time, but when we come back, we'll handicap whether we think that Trump is going to get the cabinet he wants, and then we're going to talk about more of the news of the week. This is Anthony Weiner on your left and James Flippin on your right. We'll be right back.
It's the left versus the right. In the right corner, it's James Flippin. In the left corner, it's Anthony Weiner. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner on your left and James Flippin on your right. And if you can't get enough of James Flippin, and who can, Monday morning, the morning show, you and Curtis are going to be hosting, and we're going to have you covered corner to corner for the inauguration. You don't need to watch it anywhere else. You can just listen to us, or you can watch the television, turn the volume down, and just listen to the dulcet tones of James Flippin and the slightly unhinged tones of Curtis Lewa.
And then during the afternoon, because Greg Kelly is going to be down at the inauguration, I'll be on with Noam doing like anchored coverage of the inauguration.
Well, that's the thing, not to blow smoke up everyone's ass here, but one of the things we do well on 77 WABC, we have a lot of commentary. We have commentary that I just did from the left. We have this kind of left versus right, but also we do straight news better than anyone else around, so we encourage people to stick around. I should point out, Sid is going to be where?
Well, Sid is going to be down in D.C., but I guess because the whole thing's moving inside, he's going to have to watch on TV like everybody else.
It'd be interesting unless they shoehorn him into the rotunda with everyone else.
Maybe if we see him in there, I don't think we'll be shocked.
Yeah, exactly. He'll be the guy wearing like the fur coat and the horns. They're sitting there. So let's just do. I teased that we were going to get to a lot more of the confirmations. Let's just do one more kind of briefly. Pam Bondi, Attorney General. Here's my quick take on Pam Bondi. She is the most out-of-it nominee in American history. Every time she was asked a question, well, what do you think about Donald Trump saying that we're going to prosecute journalists? I didn't hear him say that. What do you think about the idea that we're going to prosecute politicians who got... I didn't hear him say that. Every answer was, I didn't hear him say that. I don't think I want an attorney general to read the news. What about you?
Well, I mean, I think that what happens is sometimes people take, and we already referenced it with the bleach thing, right? People take Trump's comments and they attempt to either take it hyper literally, as with the bleach thing, or sort of extrapolate what that might mean. So when Trump talks about the fake news or files a lawsuit against the Des Moines Register concerning the poll, for example, and whether or not it had the crosstabs and whether or not it was properly vetted, there's some people who want to take that all the way to, journalists are going to be thrown in jail as a result of this. Or if you have objections to the 2020 election, that he's going to cancel all future elections, kind of taking it to that hyperbolic place. So Bondi may have been pushing back against some of that.
Let's take those two examples. Because you're a news guy, Donald Trump has repeatedly said something like 41 different times, the members of the media are enemies of the country and should be prosecuted. Okay, she's now the chief prosecuting officer of the country. And for her to say, I never heard Donald Trump say that, is a lie. And you shouldn't lie when you're going to be Attorney General. The conversation that she was asked about the results of the 2020 election is not an academic thing, because to some degree that informs how you decide whether to prosecute people who are trying to overturn the election. Right? So she is not just a random person off the street. She's someone who's going to be the Attorney General of the United States. I think she's going to get confirmed. She's going to be the Attorney General to say, I am unfamiliar. She was his legal team trying to overturn the results.
Well, again, what you classify as trying to overturn the results is to someone else an investigation of potential voter fraud and trying to get to the bottom of whether or not that election was properly held.
Hey, Attorney General Flippin, you got the job. You answered the question at least. Her answer was, I'm just here trying to be a regular country lawyer.
I'll take it back to the comment we had with Hegseth, where you do get into those individual exchanges between the lawmakers and the nominee. In her opening statement, in the overarching way, she talked about getting away from the politicized nature of the DOJ and trying to get back to this notion of this is about prosecuting crimes, not political opponents.
Yeah, this is like the the kid who kills his parents and then cries for mercy because he's an orphan. Like she's the one who's been saying the FBI, the federal government is out to get him, and then she's like, I got to stop all of that now. Anyway, I think these people, after some original problems, with the possible exception that we can talk about next week of that Meshuggah stooge for Putin. What's her name?
Oh, you're talking about Gabbard?
Yeah, except for Gabbard, who I think still, there was a story in the Wall Street Journal this week that Republicans off the record say that if this was a closed vote, she would lose 15 Republican votes, like because people think that she really is not up to the job. With her exception, it seems like he's basically going to get the whole cabinet that he proposed, right? I don't see anyone that's actually in trouble. Do you?
I mean, it depends on what you hear, and some of the. I guess some people have suggested that maybe Hegseth
or Kennedy.
Yeah, or I guess
well, Hegseth, after the Hegseth hearing, Joni Ernst of Iowa, a woman who was in the military, who was sexually abused, that's her whole identity is fighting back against sexual abuse in the military. She flipped on this because a lot of you MAGA nuts got into her feed and changed her. So I think now Hegseth's going to pass.
I mean, look, and let's hold Ernst accountable for her own actions, right? The senators are supposed to be above the passions of the moment. They have a longer term, let's say, than House reps.
I think she's up. She's up in 2026.
Well, I mean, okay, then that's obviously she's got to make a political calculus there, and they've said that she faces a potential primary if she wants to go against. But that's the thing, right? You would like to believe that if it's truly within her interpretation of the facts or what she believes to be the case, that Hegseth was an abuser or ever abused women, you'd like to think that she would take a stand on that one.
And she did. She took a stand that lasted for about a week until Bannon.
Or she looked into the situation further and she said, okay, there may be a he said, she said about whether or not this person hooked up that night and cheated on her husband. But to say that it was a sexual abuse situation might be going
well, the
far.
FBI had it, didn't release the information. Reminds you a lot of the Kavanaugh situation. But apropos of this.
Wait. You're suggesting that Kavanaugh. What exactly are you saying there?
When Kavanaugh was appointed, and they had all these questions of his accusations about sexual misconduct when he was earlier in his career, the FBI was.
You mean when he was in high school?
I was in college.
Whatever.
Yeah. The FBI was tasked with doing an investigation of this that they never did. It turned out they never did it. They basically said they would. They never did.
You mean the 30-year-old, 40-year-old allegations that some crazy woman?
Yeah, that the FBI said they were going to investigate, and they did not. And before you know it, we have
they did a surface level investigation.
No, they basically
this is completely unfounded.
They basically said they were going to, and then they didn't because
but it's an interesting comparison.
I think Donald Trump was the president at the time, and so he told the FBI, "Don't investigate this guy," and they didn't because the FBI is so in the bag for Democrats.
I would say the Kavanaugh comparison is an interesting one and says a lot about the allegations against Hegseth.
Here's a parlor game you can do when we get off the air. Do a Google search for Hegseth, Kavanaugh, and you'll see how many parallels that there were. Anyway, but let's go to something else that is you accidentally almost stumbled into the Anthony Weiner line on this. So there's a guy who's the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and the chairman in the House of Representatives, in most cases, get voted on by their caucus. In some rare committee appointments, the Speaker gets to decide. The Rules Committee is like that, but so is the Intelligence Committee. And the Intelligence Committee and the Speaker Johnson fired this guy called Turner, this congressman called Turner, as the chairman, the Republican chairman. This is Republican on Republican crime here. Fired him, and as it turned out, he fired him because Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago, and this has been reported and not disputed by anyone, including by Johnson, said, "I don't like that guy. He's too strongly pro-Ukraine. I want him out." Johnson fires and puts in some other dude whose name I don't recall at the moment. Now, you said earlier about the constitutional separation of powers, Joni Ernst doing her job, and whether you think she did or didn't, I agree with that. These guys there's a division of power here. Are you at all concerned about the idea that the executive branch is strong-arming the legislative branch on who they choose to do such an important job?
Well, I mean, I think that you've often talked about this, how it's important for the Speaker in particular and the executive, assuming that they're aligned in party, but even potentially when they're not, for them to be able to find some sort of working ground and for them to be able to kind of come together and operate in lockstep if you're going to achieve some of the things you want to achieve legislatively, through congressional spending, all this kind of stuff. So I don't know that I necessarily see that as really like problematic, because you made the point of noting that for whatever reason, given the trappings of Congress, there's only several committee positions where the speaker can just kind of say, boom, that's the way we're going to do it. And then just to connect to the actual issue, and I know we've got it on our agenda to talk about it with the Hamas-Israel hostage
We'll talk about
deal.
that next.
Trump has made it clear that one of his priorities is to reach a ceasefire, to reach a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia.
Correct.
So it may well be that he looks at the situation, runs a calculus, and says, I don't think that guy being in that position is conducive to reaching a peace agreement.
I think all of that is fair, but misunderstands the separation of power. So the Intelligence Committee doesn't pass laws. They don't do policy. Here's what they do. They have something called the Gang of Four. The lead Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, the lead Republican, the lead on the Senate Intelligence. They get a lot of intelligence that members of Congress do not get. Very often there are things in the law that require that the executive branch give briefings or provide information before they take certain acts. Like, it's a way people think that there are clear delineations of power in the Constitution. Actually, it's more overlapping. You know, the intelligence, the House of Representatives has and the Senate have oversight. The idea that the person being overseen is going into the overseer, whatever your party is, and says, I want to choose the guy because I'm afraid that guy is not on my side. You actually you want tension. Even if you're a Republican, and it's a Republican, you want someone who's going to be clear-eyed about looking at the intelligence and saying, okay, here's what we think you should do or not. And here's another thing that happens. Very often, those people become like the end of the funnel for members of Congress. I would very often say to someone on the Intelligence Committee who got a briefing about a thing, I said, I know you can't tell me everything, but here's this vote that we have to do. Give me your judgment about a thing. It's very important to have an independent legislature in that case. And I would think, as a constitutionalist like yourself, as a libertarian like yourself, the idea that the overseer and the overseen are going to be picking each other's lineup is problematic.
Well, but I mean, is the implication that past presidents have never shown a preference or leaned on a speaker?
Never in history. And has the Intelligence Committee chairman been picked by I mean, if it is, I've never heard of it. It wasn't referenced anywhere this week in all of these stories. It was like the jaw drop. It was a jaw drop moment because everyone is like, all right, Donald Trump is owning the Senate. We kind of get that, all right? He's using outside pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But now to go to this deep inside position that's really kind of important for the checks and balances, and Johnson is saying, sure, I'll outsource that because the president gave a call and I would not be the speaker unless Donald Trump is happy. That really is problematic.
Well, I mean, I'm going to have to do a little bit more looking into it because I don't know as much about the past appointees of that particular position, and if the speaker changed it just because of the president coming in or whatever. That's definitely something that's worth looking into. But look, I would say that if I'm going to be fair about it, anytime major norms are changed or crossed or kind of done away with, it does give me pause. So if that's one of those examples of it, I'm going to have to look at it.
Yeah,
like
I mean, Harry
the Body Reid got rid of the filibuster.
Hey, they violated a norm when they brought in a former politician to be on a radio show, and look how badly that worked out. All right, let's go to the next thing, and this deserves a little bit more time than we probably have before the break. Trump-Biden peace deal is what I wrote down here because it was kind of this rare moment. Donald Trump wanted a deal to be done. Joe Biden wanted to get a deal done. Everyone wanted the hostages to come home. Everyone wants Hamas to be squashed. Israel, whatever it is. Okay, so the deal happens.
Well, not everybody wants Hamas squashed.
Well, the deal happened. It was a very similar deal that was available to all the sides back in August. Now one Sinwar is dead. Another Sinwar is making the decision. Hamas is much weaker. Israel is much stronger. And if all goes well, we're all holding our breath tomorrow, this deal goes into effect. We don't have to go into the details of it. You've done a good job of that on the news briefings. Was this a rare moment that Trump and Biden's teams worked together to get a good outcome? Or is this a case of Biden trying to get credit for something Trump did, or Trump trying to get credit for what Biden did? Or is this not a great deal? I mean, there's a lot of different ways you can go with this conversation.
Yeah, there is, actually. I would say this. First of all, hard for me to comment on whether or not it's a good deal or a bad deal. I think there's so many different layers to it and different perspectives when it gets into that. And I also kind of think the people of Israel should decide whether or not it's a good deal. Obviously, I feel a certain type of way about all the taxpayer money that we send for the fight, and that's not necessarily my cup of tea. But I think that anything that results in the putting down of the guns, putting down of the bombs, potentially getting humanitarian aid into Gaza, it's hard to really know what is or isn't exactly happening there. That all is good, and I think that we should be trying to push for a ceasefire. As far as the potential cooperation between the Biden White House and the Trump White House, that's good too, right? Like, we do want to see some of that. There's the cynic in me that says, hey, did this potentially get done because Biden is no longer beholden to the ballot box and you don't have to worry about the Arab voters in Michigan because that's a swing state? You don't want to make them angry if you go too pro-Israel, or make the Jewish voting bloc angry if you go too hard on the pro-Hamas side or pro-Gaza side. So there's that cynicism. There's also the fact that Trump has been very clearly saying all hell is going to break loose if this deal doesn't get done. And did Hamas make a calculus and say, any deal we get under the Trump White House is going to stink compared to this one, so maybe we should actually make it happen? I don't know. There's different angles, a lot of different leverage points there. Hard to really answer without knowing what's. I mean,
and we also have, sometimes history goes back and looks and finds out that Nixon made sure there was not a deal to solve Vietnam before he took office. Reagan said, don't release the hostages, etc. Sometimes there are these back channels that are pretty sinister. In this case, I think it was the alignment of interest. Trump had made it very clear he wanted this off the desk by the time he got there because it would have been a headache for him. I think that he probably reached out to Bibi and said, do the deal. I don't want it to be hanging around. And obviously, Joe Biden's been trying to get this done for the longest time. It remains to be an open question whether this turns out to be a deal that's good or bad, but I think you're exactly right. The big question, the big answer always is in that part of the world. There's only one democracy that's weighing in on all of this, and it ain't the Palestinians, it ain't the terrorist organizations, and not the 20 Arab states that are still at war with Israel. It's Israel, and we can only pray for the best. And we'll be right back.
Versus the right. From Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
So welcome back to Left versus Right. Anthony Weiner and James Flippin. I'm on the left. He's on the right. I'm on the blue chair. He's on the red chair. And I say that because if you're watching on YouTube, you probably know that. This is available also as a podcast wherever you get podcasts, or you can always tune in live on 77 WABC, the most powerful terrestrial radio station in all of the East Coast. And also you can get, if you miss James on Monday morning doing the Sid Show, you can get that as a podcast. If your thing is going to the gym and listening to 3 hours of James Flippin and Curtis Sliwa, we got you covered.
At the gym.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. There you go. So let's talk a little bit about some interesting elbow throwing going around the inauguration. A lot was made this week of some of the people who are on the guest list and who are not. A lot of tumult around Michelle Obama not going to the inauguration. She also, interestingly, didn't even show up at the Jimmy Carter funeral, and people are locking those things together because of the way people were seated. She would have been sitting next to Donald Trump. So she ain't going. Any thoughts on this?
Well, it's of course attracting a lot of intrigue, and both of the sort of more rumor mill variety, I guess, and just kind of people speculating and talking. Like, some people have gone so far as to say, could there be some sort of marital strife between Barack and Michelle? Their kids are out of the house now. They're empty nesters. We know that puts a strain on relationships, whatever. Of course, there's the implication that maybe she just really hates Donald Trump so much that she couldn't possibly
ding, yes,
sitting next to him, sitting next to him, or coming to the inauguration. Trump and Melania Trump did not attend Biden's inauguration.
Oh, really? Tell me a little. Here, bring us back to that 4 years ago. What was that about?
Heavily disputed 2020 election, there was some bad feelings and some contention there. So, yeah, I don't know. Obviously, the one thing I'll say, and just kind of put this out there very earnestly, that I hope she's not dealing with some sort of like a health thing.
I don't.
I mean, you heard, because Kate Middleton was out of the public eye forever, and you thought, whoa, what's going on there? Is there cheating? Is there?
Dr. Freud, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. She doesn't like the guy. I don't even know if I would go if I had to sit. Well, I probably would just to give him some crap for 3 hours. But she just doesn't like the guy. He was vicious and mean. Questioned the providence of the citizenship of her husband. Never apologized for doing that. Accused him of being from Kenya, from being a Muslim, and all these different horrible things. He's the incoming president is a racist SOB. I don't blame her. But this whole idea, whoa, intrigue. No, there's no intrigue. She's like, I would rather cut my arm off than sit and watch this guy be sworn in. I think sometimes people just say, I don't want to go. Yeah. On the other side of it is Sid, who's probably, here it's Saturday, he's probably walking up 95 in the freezing cold with a big sign that said, I'm Sid Rosenberg, I'm on the way to the inauguration. There's all kinds. Another interesting one, and this will lead us into a longer conversation about this subject. The TikTok CEO or something like that is going to be, again, this is all who is going to be in prominent seats. Now it's who knows what it's going to be. But I just thought it was interesting that the CEO or that president or the owner of TikTok, whatever it is, was going to have a prominent place there. I tell you, the tech love affair with Donald Trump has now reached epic proportions. But this is the same time that the Supreme Court said, no, the law that was passed that forced divestiture or banning of TikTok is constitutional. Mm-hmm. But other things have happened. Are you familiar with all the latest news on this? That Joe Biden said, I'm not going to enforce this. I have the power to extend it. Kicked it to Donald Trump. Chuck Schumer, on behalf of Democrats, said, we're fine with extending this deadline a little bit. It seems like the stories of TikTok's death might have been exaggerated a bit, like it might live to see another day.
Yeah, well, it's such a hard thing to really make sense of for me because I have my own hesitations and sort of lack of trust about the U.S. government, right? And there's any number of reasons why, aside from the national security concerns, lawmakers may have looked to enact this ban. I have no idea how much pressure or flowers they got from the Googles of the world, the Metas of the world, the Elon Musks of the world to try to push forward on a ban for this particular app, TikTok, which is the king of the king in social media right now, the biggest, most popular one. And obviously that's not a good thing for some of the domestic providers of social media. So I don't know for sure how much I truly believe the idea that this ban is only rooted in or chiefly rooted in national security concerns. I have my own problems with all the data being shared with the CCP, and that seems weird to me. I don't necessarily like it. I also know that there's a ton of surveillance and kind of data harvesting that goes on just all the time as being a member of modern interaction and communication. So I don't really know exactly how I feel about the ban.
Well, we've talked about the ban before. I mean, I disagree with you. I think the big tech companies are really conflicted about this because on one hand, they might see TikTok as a competitor and they might say, well, maybe I can go buy a piece of it when they divest. Maybe
which some of them are talking about.
Some of them are talking about it. But more importantly, if I were they, I'd be very nervous about the Congress, which has done nothing to protect America from social media companies, suddenly deciding we're going to get together in a bipartisan fashion. The hard left, the hard right, and people in the middle voted for this TikTok ban. They might get very nervous and say, and they've basically been quiet. You can say maybe behind the scenes they like this. I think they're a little bit nervous because you've made the point, I've made the point. If you're concerned about your data, okay, maybe the CCP doesn't get it when Facebook has it, but that jackass Zuckerberg has it, and I don't like that either. So there are those conflicts. But it appears that what's happening now, you know, I have said to you the strongest force in politics is always inertia. Well, no, there's one thing stronger. A multi-billion-dollar company that could disappear overnight. Someone is going to find an interest in buying it in some form or another. How that winds up looking, because part of the problem is the present owners, the Chinese interests, at very least Chinese government has some control. They don't want to sell it to a U.S. interest. So we're kind of caught between the devil and the deep blue sea, and I say we. Whether you like TikTok and social media or not, it is now a source where commerce happens. It's a source where people create things that get bought and sold. We promote our show there. There are a lot of regular, normal businesses out there that TikTok is one of the ways that they do business. And to say that we're going to eliminate all that value overnight by just saying you can't download it. And by the way, as of tomorrow, our listeners aren't going to be able to update it at the App Store. Now, that may change. For all we know, we wake up tomorrow morning and that's changed. But that's where it is. But I agree with you. This is not a ground ball left-right issue because it's kind of one of those things. And I think technology is going to be one of these places you and I agree more, because I think that you can make a really good argument that the same things they're nervous about TikTok for, people who don't mean the best for the American interests, you can say that about Google maybe.
Right.
And other countries in Europe, by the way, are putting in restrictions on things that maybe they're protecting their people. Why shouldn't we protect ours? I totally get it. It's not a clean debate.
Yeah, and I think that, as much as I do have concerns, no question about it, about China's influence in like American politics and some of the money that goes around, and we've seen indictments even here in New York for some people connected to politicians who have accepted money from that. I just don't know that I really fully believe the boogeyman story 1,000%. I also look at it as it's kind of weird the way that they have to share all that information with the central government, because at the very least, what you think about, at least I do, here in the U.S., is that your data and your privacy and how that's being sort of commoditized is just in the pursuit of capital gains, as opposed to maybe something more nefarious if it was with China. I mean, look, trying to spy on people. I don't know.
Look,
again, I'm being honest and saying
I agree.
I'm conflicted and thinking.
And I have the same thing. And we don't need to go on much longer about it, but I can tell you that there's a very good chance that the threats to the United States and our sovereignty and our people will come through some form of technology in the future.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if the Chinese are going to build, they're building boats to attack Taiwan maybe, but if they're going to come after us, it's going to be through our kids, it's through our addiction to our phones, it's through propaganda. And we have a long history in this country, even here on the radio. If John Catsimatidis wanted to sell this radio station to a foreign interest, there's a whole lot of paperwork and some restrictions about doing that are back from the 1930s when we were talking about loose lips sink ships and like propaganda was a real issue. I think it's even more so. I think it's even more so today.
I will just say, wouldn't it be fascinating if it turns out all the drones are like somehow like floating servers that allows you to access TikTok?
Yeah. Someone's been listening to Frank Morano too much. All right. Let's talk a little bit, kind of wrapping up a little bit from last week's news around the fires in California. More under control, enormous devastation, loss of life in the dozens. And a conversation that we started last week has taken off on steroids in Washington around making this the Marxism of California, and we in Congress, we want to put conditions on the aid that we send to California to make a political point about the way they've run their government. Now, we now know that a lot of the things that we didn't know last week were largely not true. Things about running out of water, things about not being totally ready.
Well, there was a reservoir that was not properly restored and should have been, and it was a reservoir that's dedicated to firefighting purposes, and they didn't have the proper cover over it, and they drained it, and there was definitely
I think there's plenty of
the ball with
there's
that,
plenty of things to go back and look at the same way, we can go back and look at New Orleans for those bullards that were not up that should have been. Yes, having a conversation about what we should or should not have done, but there's virtual consensus among even the firefighters that were complaining about their budget cuts that this was such a phenomenon that it didn't matter how much water that you wound up having. We just don't have the infrastructure to fight for fires.
Just to push back against you, there was that fire chief who went on CNN who was in tears saying that I told them months ago, that these cuts to the firefighting service are going to have dire circumstances, and he's the consequences. And he said now people have died.
Yes, but he also was among the many people that said, when people like Elon Musk showed up and said, even if we had all of the water perfectly positioned, we can do 2 fires at most, and you can't stop 4 fires. Listen, the way they put it, we put 1,000 gallons a minute or something like that on a house fire. When you have thousands and thousands of house fires in 100-mile-an-hour wind blowing embers all over the place, it is not something that any amount of water is going to be able to stop. But let's step past that for a minute to this concept of, well, we are going to put restrictions on what we do to help people in times of emergencies for what can only be called political reasons with a small p. People are saying, I don't like the governor of California. I don't like the mayor of California. Therefore, I, the speaker, who's a Republican, says I'm going to put limits on it. Even that bozo O'Reilly, who's on our airwaves, making up stuff about water and whatever else. Look, I might not think that Florida is a very well-run state. When they have a hurricane, you don't hear me getting on the radio and saying don't give them aid because they have a jackass running their state. That's not something that we do.
What is that? How does that work from like the mechanics of it? What would the restrictions be? How would that work?
Excellent question. That's the other question. By the way, California, New York, we are net donors to the bozos in Louisiana and that Johnson represents.
I mean, you have to get into the actual applications of entitlements as well and how people take money out via entitlements. It's not exactly as cut and dried as you make it out.
Well, do you mean payments going to – I'm talking about that payments in terms of the payments that wind up going to states for all things, including food stamps, including Medicaid. What winds up happening is we, New York, because we have such high tax states that so many rich people are in, we subsidize the rest of the country. If we want to do it this way, if the Republicans want to say we want to get back only what we put in, I'm there for that. Now, that's not the way we are as a country. We are a country. We're in it together.
So, in other words, you're saying that you wouldn't necessarily have a problem with, because I think this is really what people are referring to when they talk about this kind of stuff. You wouldn't have a problem with the state of California enacting a state of emergency and then, in essence, federal funding flowing directly to those state representatives or officials in an overarching way, and then they can put that money wherever they wish.
I'm not,
because that was like a thing during COVID.
I'm not super intimately knowledgeable about how FEMA works and then how reconstruction money gets put. I remember when we had Hurricane Sandy and we had 9/11 here, there was some monies that you declare an emergency. The president of the United States says, yep, I agree. And then it triggers automatically funds that we put in the budget. By the way, FEMA funds that Republicans didn't want to fund, if you remember, at the end of last year. And then the next phase is, well, how do we rebuild these cities from, and then that's a big fight. Remember the fight we had over rebuilding after Hurricane Sandy.
It's especially going to be bad in California with all the bureaucracy and red tape that they have.
And all the rich people that built right up against the forest and right up against the war. Same way they say about New Jersey. The same exact arguments they made against our friends in New Jersey and our friends out in Rockaway. Well, you shouldn't have built there. Okay, that's fine. We're a populated barrier island in Rockaway. To say that we shouldn't live here anymore is not a plausible explanation.
Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that in California, just because it's such a heavily regulated Democratic state, you can't put up a privacy fence without going through this committee, that committee, get this approval from this person. It takes 30 days. And then it's going to be, unless they can totally change that whole situation, and I think Newsom has suggested that he's going to try and push that through, it's going to be hard to rebuild it even if you have the money.
There's only one party in America that is trying to preserve open spaces. And it ain't the Republicans. The Republicans say build on everything. Donald Trump is even like, let's build in the national forest. Yes, I agree. There are people building in places that they should not build. And I am totally fine. If you believe that the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says that the federal government should tell California their housing codes, you are no libertarian by any definition I know.
No, I mean, look, I think that in terms of being a libertarian, you would say there's too much oversight from the government most of the time.
Don't vote for Newsom. Where in California do you live?
And we'll see.
Where in California do you live?
Allow me to say that I think that this event is going to be a watershed moment for the voters of California. And I think that the feelings they have right now about how they were let down by Mayor Bass and to an extent Governor Newsom probably ahead of time is definitely something that could have an impact on California's electoral history.
By the way, speaking of feelings, you know who gives me a good feeling? Vinny Medugno, coming right up.